The agreement between Ottawa and Alberta was pitched as a win for the Canadian economy and for national unity. But division is already showing as debate heats up following the signing of the agreement between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. The Memorandum of Understanding signed Thursday represents the first step towards a new bitumen pipeline that would carry 1 million barrels of Alberta oil a day to the BC coast for shipment to Asian markets.
I think what it's going to do, especially with the removal of the emissions cap on Alberta, as well as the removal of the net zero power regs, I think it's going to unleash an incredible amount of investment and allow us to work together on important nation-building projects.
In effect, it creates an energy transition, all aspects of energy, but really sets the stage for an industrial transformation.
Alberta and Ottawa have agreed to increase the industrial carbon price in the province. It's at $95 now a ton. Will go up to $130. The construction of the Pathways Alliance carbon capture and storage project, that agreement stresses no pipeline can go ahead without that project, lowering Alberta's oil patch methane emissions by 75% relative to 2014 levels by 2035. The deal also suspends the clean electricity regulations for Alberta and allows for changes to the tanker ban off the coast of BC if needed. Those changes and rollbacks of previous legislation is what led to the resignation of Stephen Guilbeault, who said on Friday he fundamentally disagrees with the agreement and the measures he put in place as Environment Minister are essential to Canada's fight against climate change. BC's buy-in will be a critical part of any pipeline, but neither the province or First Nations were at the table during this initial phase of consultations between Alberta and Ottawa. The Haisla Nation near Kitimat in northern BC is one of the coastal First Nations where a pipeline could go to port, and their elected Chief Councillor Maureen Nyce joins me now from Squamish this morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Rosemary.
So you've had a couple of days to digest all of this. Tell me how you're feeling about this agreement.
Well, I think I've calmed down a little bit. I've read the MOU. I understand a little bit more about what is proposed in there, and what I see is a lot of barriers that will prevent this pipeline. I think it's going to be a very hard sell to British Columbia, to First Nations people. I think undoing all of those, the emissions cap, and basically undermining the Fisheries Act and the Species at Risk Act, I think those are all things that they're going to be met with a lot of resistance. So I think it.
Sorry, Maureen. Tell me how you feel about the fact that you, First Nations, writ large, were not part of this initial conversation, that the agreement was signed, and now they are going to begin a conversation with First Nations in BC.
Well, it reminds me of a long time ago when that's how things got done in Canada and in British Columbia. That was how things done. We were not consulted. We were not brought to the table for any of the discussions. And I'll bring up the Indian Act in that. There's a lot of things that are in there that we didn't put in there. So it just reminiscent of times that we thought were behind us. So it feels like a big step back to me.
Mm. You said you'd calmed down a little bit since you initially saw the deal. Is that because after reading it, you don't actually think that this is going to happen, the pipeline, that this is not possible?
I do. I think it's going to be like the next impossible thing. If Canada gets this done, I will be gobsmacked if they can pull this off. If Alberta can pull this off, if they can find a proponent that wants to pick up this battle and carry it forward, because there's a lot of barriers in the way. I see it a long way off, and I think by the time they get this off the ground, I don't think they'll be able to sell any oil because nobody's going to be buying it.
Mm. You had a meeting with the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith shortly before this was signed and announced. What was that conversation like in terms of what she was hoping to get from you or telling you?
We were very clear in our letter to Danielle Smith on the purpose of the meeting. The purpose of the meeting was to explore some things that we were interested in. basically to get away from talking about an oil pipeline or an export facility. So that was the tone of our letter. And when we met with Danielle Smith, she didn't talk about the pipeline. She didn't talk about an export facility. She was very inquisitive about what we were interested in. So I thought that was a positive note within our meeting. There were some things that I had an issue with, but yeah.
What are the things you had an issue with?
We jointly met with the District of Kitimat, and we had an approach that we had planned prior to meeting with Danielle Smith, and we at the Haisla Nation felt we were in line with the District of Kitimat. So there were some comments made by the mayor that caught me off guard, and I think he's walked them back a little bit, stating that he's interested in anything in our territory. But I think he has walked that back a little bit. So that's given me a bit more encouragement about the relationship going forward.
One of the things that sorry to interrupt, Maureen, but one of the things that the Premier of BC has said that he believes that a pipeline and the tanker ban could really jeopardize the LNG projects that are happening in that province. Do you agree that the sort of the social license for those projects would disappear if this were to happen?
I don't know if that would happen because those are projects that we have worked with the province. We've worked with other Indigenous communities. They have been aligned with our what we want to see in our territory. There are things that we can accept. There's always that risk opportunity that you have to factor in when you're considering a project. So I don't think it would seem like unproductive to turn away at this point from that. I think we'd continue to move forward. We are invested in one of the projects, as you may know, Cedar LNG, we are majority owners of. So it would be hard to walk away from that.
Chief, I'll just end on this. Is there any scenario where you would be willing to sit down and have a conversation about a future pipeline with some sort of First Nations ownership, as the deal points out, or is that not on the table at all for you?
Our nation has spoken about this more than 20 years ago. The tone hasn't changed. The opinion hasn't changed. And I think it would be very difficult to sit down and talk about that because that gets formed as consultation. And that would, we just aren't interested in that project at all.
Okay. Chief Maureen Nyce, nice to see you again. Thanks for getting up early for me on a Sunday. I do appreciate it.
Likewise, nice to see you, Rosie. Take care.
Okay, take good care.
Bye.
The MOU does highlight the need for meaningful consultation and engagement, but it doesn't make direct reference to the notion of free, prior, and informed consent, a legal principle that isn't a veto, but it does guarantee the rights of Indigenous groups to participate in decisions impacting their land. While not all First Nations are against natural resource development, some critics say that broad language in the deal, as well as the potential fast-tracking of projects in the national interest, could lead to a lack of meaningful consultation. Robert Phillips is a political executive at the First Nations Summit, and he joins me now. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
I want to talk to you more about what this agreement means for First Nations people, but I want to get your sense on the fact that there wasn't really consultation leading up to this agreement, that the agreement now says there should be Indigenous consultation and engagement, but there wasn't really a conversation before. Does that concern you at all?
Yeah, it's very concerning and it's frustrating to a certain degree. As you know, Bill C-5 was very much rushed through, and there was a lack of consultation. Discussions are one thing, but when we talk about consultation with First Nations, especially when we have Aboriginal rights and title and treaty rights across Canada that are constitutionally protected, as well as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and in federally with the United Nations Declaration Act, and provincially in British Columbia we have DRIPA, which is the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So with these are laws of British Columbia, and because of that, we have to have consultation and consent of First Nations. And, these major projects are, again, we do understand that revenue generating, did talk to Minister Hodgson, talked about a potentially, $500 billion to $1 trillion of economic revenues that are coming into British Columbia and Canada. And, we do understand that for First Nations especially, our socioeconomic conditions are very, very dire in a lot of cases, especially in isolated rural, northern, and coastal First Nations.
Right.
But it can't be at all costs. It can't be rushed through. We need consultation.
So I spoke to Marilyn Slett, who I'm sure you know from the Coastal First Nations last week. She had not had any conversations with Alberta or the federal government, and was really adamant that the tanker ban in particular is not something that Coastal First Nations can accept, and the pipeline in general, not something they're particularly interested in. From what you know, do you think the idea of what you're talking about, an Indigenous ownership stake, will make any of those communities think again? Or is there any way, do you think, that the Alberta government can discuss that with them to try and make inroads?
Well, I think meeting with and having discussions is one thing. Getting down to negotiations and looking for that consultation and consent is another. And I can't emphasize enough that the Prime Minister as well as the Minister have to have those discussions with those First Nations, especially the coastal First Nations that will be affected most, and potentially looking at a pipeline that could go across British Columbia from Alberta and affect the First Nations along the route as well. So we understand in terms of the revenues and potentially all the funding and as well as the revenue sharing and equity stake in the game, which will be very important, because we know that in terms of looking at building schools, hospitals, all of those things are very important. But the consultation with the First Nations, and especially the coastal First Nations, would need to take place right away. Those discussions would have to take place, technical, legal, as well as, in terms of understanding everything that will potentially happen if it does happen. But right now we know it's an MOU. It's basically an agreement in principle. We don't have a proponent. We don't have the monies that would take, and it would take time as well. And I know they want to expedite things, but again, they would need the consent of those First Nations.
Do you think that they need the consent, Mr. Phillips, or do they need to show meaningful consultation? And by that, I guess I mean, if coastal First Nations say this is not happening, is the project just not, is it dead, I guess, before it even begins?
Well, we have to look at the national interests. We do know it's a federal jurisdiction. The Premier himself said that, it was tried. And I'm trying to avoid what happened 10, 15 years ago. And that's why that meaningful consultation is very important, so that we have those discussions, we have those negotiations, they sit down. It is not just a partnership that we're talking about here. We're talking government to government with British Columbia. We're talking nation to nation with Canada. And so, we have those constitutionally protected rights. There is Aboriginal title on the lands in British Columbia. And throughout Canada, they have agreements. They have treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements. We're lacking treaties in British Columbia. I do believe that's why we're in that situation. Because if we did have treaties or we did have agreements throughout British Columbia, then I do believe we would have not just a framework that we're building here now in terms of the work, but we would have actual deals, we would actually have agreements. Yeah. And I think that's the difference with British Columbia.
Okay, Robert Phillips, let's speak again as this story unfolds. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you. Cookstown.
The agreement may be a hard sell, as you're hearing there in BC, but for Alberta's oil patch, it's pretty much the opposite. Those in Canada's oil industry are hopeful that the scrapping or weakening of many of the previous Liberal government's climate-related regulations can lead to developing and expanding the country's oil exports. Paul Colborne is the CEO of Surge Energy, and he joins me now. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Rosemary. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you and getting your perspective. Obviously, there's a lot of details to be sorted out and some hurdles yet to be cleared here. But what do you think is the likelihood of a private proponent, a company coming out of the woodwork here to make this pipeline happen?
I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for several firms to come out of come out of private industry and look to fund this pipeline opportunity. It's a world-class asset that Canada has. We have a number of them, and this is one project that I think makes a ton of sense. So I would expect several companies to come out and make a bid on this opportunity.
Why do you think it makes a ton of sense, given that there are still, consultations and some sort of arrangement or agreement that has to happen with British Columbia, with First Nations, and of course we know that the price of these kinds of projects is very significant. So why do you think it makes sense right now?
Well, I think from a macro perspective, 6 billion people out of 8 billion people in the world are industrializing at the same time. China, India, Asia, Africa. They need every barrel of crude they can get. They need all the resources Canada has: uranium, potash, pulp and paper, oil, natural gas. So I think it's a world-class asset base that is finally now being opened up to competition in the world. And then you look at the steps being done by the Carney government. Bill C-5 is now law, and that is saying for projects that make sense in the national interest, special interest groups will have their say, but it won't be over 7 years. It'll be over 2 years or less.
Some of the other things that the Premier at least has pointed to, the cap on emissions, which was never put into place but now won't be, the clean electricity regulations, which will be put on pause for Alberta, the potential to remove the tanker ban if needed. How much do you think those regulations and laws impeded the private capital or future pipelines?
Yeah, I think all you need to do is look at foreign capital investment in Canada in the last 9 years and why our GDP per capita is one of the lowest in the OECD nations is because of these constraints. I just came back from a trip to Texas, and U.S. investor interest in Canada is opening up, great resources, open for business. There's always going to be the push-pull of special interest groups have to be heard, the environment has to be dealt with, we have to take care of things. But I think there's a sense of we're open for business, and we have amazing regulatory protections for the environment, for producing oil and gas, for pipelines.
As you know, part of the pipeline, working with the pipeline, is the Pathways Alliance project to create the world's largest carbon capture storage project. And they are supposed to happen at the same time. The idea, according to the Prime Minister and the Premier, is that this would make Alberta oil the most energy efficient, the cleanest on the planet. What do you make of this? Because that project was going to happen, or there was hope it would happen, regardless of the pipeline.
Well, I think it's a nice statement for the Carney government and Danielle Smith to make, that we're not steamrolling environmental interests. We're not steamrolling Indigenous people's interests. We're going to partner with Indigenous people. We're going to also create the CO2 sequestration project along with developing the asset. Like, to me, it's a very logical, cohesive step that they've taken.
I'll just end on this, Paul. You know, there is criticism, of course, that the agreement goes too far in weakening environmental regulations, particularly the clean electricity regulations, and that it gives too much to the oil sector. What do you say to that, to people who are concerned that this isn't the right balance?
Well, you said the right word, in my opinion, Rosemary. It's balance. So we're going to open up our resources. We're going to build a massive pipeline. We're going to create a CO2 sequestration component to it that also lets us hit our emission targets, albeit another 5 years out, but still very, very good hitting of our emission target. It has to be balanced, and I think the balance swung too far one way over the last 9 years, and I think it's coming back to a nice balance that brings foreign capital to play, competition to play for our vast resources.
Paul Colborne, nice of you to make the time for us today. Paul Colborne, the CEO of Surge Energy, thank you.
Always good, thank you.